This was the U.S. response to the massive Houthi attack on March 15th. In the early morning of March 16th, the U.S. decided to let the Houthis know this fight was far from being finished. Beginning just after midnight, the U.S. continued their offensive against secondary targets not hit in the first day of battle. But little did the Americans know, the Houthis had one last trick up their sleeve. At approximately 12:30 in the morning of March 16th, the crews aboard both the Stout and the Jason Dunham were unfazed by the previous night's attack. Right on schedule, they both let loose with a volley of Tomahawk missiles. With this strike, the Houthis have now lost their primary base to launch small boats and unmanned surface drones. But while this was a big deal, the U.S. was just getting started this morning. Back in Turkey, the B-1 bombers that attacked Yemen 12 hours before had returned to base where they refueled and rearmed and got the birds back in the air with a fresh crew, a belly full of fuel, and a new target. At approximately 4:15 that morning, the B-1s let loose with another volley of AGM-158 JASSM. With its standoff distance of at least 370 kilometers, depending on the range, these bombers have nothing to worry about with Houthi air defenses still in complete disarray. In fact, with virtually every Houthi air defense battery down, the only weapons the Houthis could possibly shoot back with are man-portable systems like the Soviet Igla or truck-mounted ZSU cannons. But without any radar, the highest distance these weapons could even think about hitting is about 8,000 feet with a max service ceiling of 60,000 feet. These bomber pilots have nothing to worry about. But little did they know, this attack on one of the Hood's main UAV bases would have huge consequences in less than 24 hours. After the B-1 bombers drop their payloads and head back to base, several of these F-35Cs of the Black Knights take off from the decks of the Harry S. Truman just after sunrise and begin screaming toward the coast for the next target of the morning. This consisted of 2 weapon storage facilities in the Marie Governet that the F-35s blew up without even as much as getting a peep out of the Houthis. However, this was because the Houthis were saving their ammunition for something else. Just as lunch began for the crews on board the Truman Strike Group, combat watchstanders on board the Gettysburg saw a familiar sight: inbound air contacts. Except this time there were a lot more of them. While the Houthis had fired 2 Almandab-2 missiles at the strike group yesterday, today they decided to give the strike group everything they got all at one time. In an attempt to overwhelm the U.S. air defenses, the Houthis agreed instead of a piecemeal attack, they would single out one ship and launch a massive strike against it, hoping for a hit. And that ship just so happened to be the Gettysburg. As the Gettysburg's crew began hooking tracks and selecting weapons, the ship's tactical action officer soon realized there was a math problem. Although the ship's spy radar can track up to 200 targets at a time, it can only engage 12 to 18 of them at a time. With at least 12 inbound missiles coming at them, the TO did not want to risk losing track of slower threats like drones that could come in behind the missile barrage while their attention was diverted. That's when he came up with a genius plan. At that moment, the cruiser's captain, who was more senior than the other ship captains, took tactical command of the group and ordered the Stout and Jason Dunham to fire SM-2 missiles at the furthest away tracks, while the Gettysburg dealt with the ones closer aboard. But while this helped lessen the amount of missiles the Gettysburg would have to shoot down from 12 to 8, it still meant the ship was in a very dangerous situation. With just a few seconds set a decade, the ship's captain ordered the crew to fire a single SM-2 at each incoming threat for the first 6 missiles. This doctrine went against the standard tactical doctrine that calls for at least 2 missiles per engagement. But this was real life and not a classroom. With a probability of hit at around 90% for a non-aircraft target, only a handful of the roughly 10,000 preformed metal fragments that make up the SM-2 would need to hit the missile to knock it out. And that is exactly what happened. On their radar screens, the Gettysburg's crew could see one target after another get splashed until there were just 2 left. However, because the ships needed to conserve SM-2s, the captain made a bold, unorthodox decision. While commanders typically like to engage missiles as far out as possible, about 50 miles is the sweet spot to ensure that they get the best chance of hitting it and have enough time for a second shot, even though this would equate to only a few extra seconds in practice. However, Gettysburg is already running low on SM-2s, and they don't know how long this fight will last. Although the ship still has 10,000 rounds of 20mm ammo for its Sea-Whiz, this is needed for drones. With its 5-inch gun incapable of hitting such a fast-moving target, their only other hope is their RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles known as ESSM. These missiles come in 4 missile quad packs loaded into a single vertical launching system cell. With a launch weight of just 620 pounds, of which only 86 pounds is a dedicated fragmentation warhead, the ESSM is much smaller than its SM-2 and SM-6 cousins. So, what the heck is it even used for? Thanks to the 134 Malawian Kwacha's rocket motor, the ESSM can travel at Mach 4, which is even faster than the SM-6. However, this speed comes at a cost since it can only travel for about 8.5 seconds before it runs out of fuel. This short run time is because the ESSM is known as a point defense weapon. While there is not a generally agreed upon range for what point defense actually is, since it depends on the threats and your capabilities, point defense is usually understood to mean engagement close to you. With a max range of about 27 miles, this would give the ESSM just about 60 seconds to shoot down the threat and avoid getting backsplatter on the ship. While using an ESSM is usually seen as a last resort, the captain advocates making it an offensive weapon, something never done before. Although unsure if this will work, the TO orders the crew to launch 2 ESSMs at the incoming threats just as they cross the 27M threshold. The crew braces for shock, but fortunately it works. Miraculously, the captain's bold decision paid off, and both threats were knocked out about 10 miles away from the ship. And now it was time to take the fight back against the Houthis. After this attack on the Gettysburg, U.S. Central Command realized they still needed to do more to eradicate Houthi command and control functions. It was clear the Houthis were still putting up some organized resistance, and the U.S. had just the perfect weapon to put a stop to that. Because the U.S. had destroyed all of the Houthi static command posts, the enemy began using mobile ones. These command posts, essentially just a Toyota pickup with a bunch of radios in the back, were much harder to strike despite their lack of armor. This is why the Air Force decided to bring in this weapon. This bomb is known as the GBU-53 Stormbreaker. It is based on the unguided small-diameter bomb, which has an overall weight of 250 pounds and uses just 105 pounds of explosives. But what makes this weapon special is because of what is on its nose. This is known as a tri-mode seeker. It gets its name because it has 3 different modes of operation that it can track targets with. The first of these is an imaging infrared seeker. With a 640x 512 high-resolution array, it can detect thermal signatures like a truck's exhaust within 0.1 degrees of accuracy. However, because Yemen is mostly desert, tons of sand and dirt are in the air. Combined with the smoke from the raging fires around the country, this makes it very difficult for an IR seeker to work in this environment. That is where the second one comes in. Known as millimeter wave radar, this 94 GHz radar can see through practically any obscurant and still hit the target within a foot of accuracy. This means no matter the smoke, sandstorms, clouds, or whatever, this mode will see through it all with pinpoint precision. However, what if the target is moving? That is where the last mode comes into play. This third option is a semi-active seeker. With its internal laser designator, the seeker acts much like the SM-2 in its final phase of flight, except this model can be used for the entire flight since the aircraft is not sending radar data to it while in the air. With this triple threat option, the pilots can either set it before they take off or allow the bomb to change its course autonomously mid-course depending on weather conditions. But while we don't know which option they picked, we do know for sure they took out these mobile command posts. After conducting other strikes that day, including a Navy P-8 Poseidon launching missiles at some training camps, the Houthis decided it was time to avenge the attack on their drone facilities and remind the Americans they still had plenty to go around. As the Truman Strike Group sailors were preparing for another round of air strikes after lunch, the escort ships picked up something odd on their radar screens. While these fast-moving tracks were definitely not aircraft or missiles, the radar was keeping a lock on them. After adjusting the settings on their spy radar, watchstanders soon realized that this was a drone swarm and it was coming right for the carrier. In order to let the escorts save their ammunition, the strike group commander decided to sortie every available F-18 the carrier could muster for emergency flight quarters. Within minutes, the first F-18s were rolling off deck. And if you look at their wing tips, you'll see quite a different loadout from before. This missile is called the A-120AM Ram. It is one of the primary air-to-air missiles carried by U.S. fighter aircraft, and today it is going to be used against these drones. The F-18 Super Hornet can carry up to 10 AM rams when in an air-to-air configuration. This consists of 2 on the wing tips, 6 under both wings, and 2 on the fuselage. With a speed of 4 times the speed of sound and a range of nearly 160 kilometers, the AMA is an extremely potent air defense weapon. Designed to take out enemy fighters, the missile can and has taken down other targets like missiles, balloons, and today drones. But despite its robust targeting capabilities, including a 40G terminal maneuver meant to throw off even the most experienced pilots, how the heck are the planes able to see what are effectively tiny dots on their screens? Thanks to this system, pilots can track these drones known as the Infrared Search and Track System Block 2. This is a passive long-range infrared sensor that detects heat from aircraft engines. Mounted on a modified centerline fuel tank, the system sensors are powerful enough to detect a ballistic missile at 220 kilometers, a cruise missile at 92 kilometers, and a person's UAV at a distance of 148 kilometers. With tracking UAVs, each unit can get fire control data on up to 12 tracks at one time. With about 10 aircraft in the air, this is more than enough capability to take this threat head-on. Over the next 7 hours, the U.S. aircraft destroyed wave after wave of drones. Although the exact number is not known, media reports that it was around several dozen. At the conclusion of this 7-hour air battle, U.S. commanders are perplexed at how resourceful the enemy appears to be. This is why in the coming days, the U.S. has a plan to finally bring the Houthis to their knees. Bye for now.